Hello and welcome to today's comprehensive news analysis by Byju's IAS. The first article that we will be discussing from today's Hindu newspaper is this. The heading is The Lowdown on India's Glasgow Announcements. The author here takes a pessimistic view about the announcement made by the Indian Prime Minister with regards to India's climate change goals. The theme of the article is that most of the announcements that are made were already happening on the ground, so there is nothing new that the government has actually promised. Secondly, the government has missed down on a few key indicators which should have been a part of the announcements. The author starts by saying that this government, particularly, has been in a habit of making big announcements without giving much prior notice. Even here at Glasgow, before the Prime Minister made the announcement of India trying to achieve the net zero target by 2070, no government officials had talked about it. In fact, even a few days before the summit, when asked, no official said that India is planning to declare this at the Glasgow summit. Interestingly, India was not under compulsion to give a target of when it would actually achieve the net zero status. However, the Prime Minister did it in his own style by surprising everyone. However, just a few days later, after all the appreciation that we have received from throughout the world about India's self restrictive targets, the government has also reiterated that the targets are contingent on the fact that India should receive appropriate amount of financial support from the developed world. In fact, in today's Hindu newspaper itself, you see that the government has said that we would require a financial help of at least $1 trillion in order to achieve our goals of climate change. Here, the author says that the government has given itself quite a bit of cushion because it would be very difficult to get this kind of an amount from the developed world on the climate change issue, and thus it allows the government to give an excuse in case our targets are not achieved. Apart from that, the author discusses these targets one by one and sees whether they are feasible or not. The first target discussed here is the promise of cutting down our emission by 1 billion tons by the year 2030. Now, this is the first time that India has taken a target in terms of absolute numbers. At present, India's emission is about 2.8 billion tons, and by 2030 it would reach about 4.5 billion tons. So from the 4.5 billion tons, if we are planning to cut it down by 1 billion ton, that means about a 20% reduction, which is not an easy target. However, the Prime Minister said that India plans to achieve this by taking up two major initiatives. The first initiative that the Prime Minister talked about was that the Indian Railways will be achieving the net zero target for its own operations by 2030, which will cut down on 60 million tons of emissions annually. Secondly, the Prime Minister says that we are in the process of installing LED bulbs wherever possible at a very large scale, which will again cut down the emissions by 40 million tons in a year. These two initiatives, when carried out for a decade, that is 10 years, will result in a reduction of 1 billion ton emission by itself without any external help. Now, the target seems pretty ambitious, although on paper and with the numbers given by the Prime Minister it seems achievable, but the ground reality has not impressed many experts who have raised concerns over this target. Secondly, the Prime Minister also mentioned that India will generate 50% of its electricity from renewable sources by 2030. Now, a simple calculation would tell you that to achieve this target, India would require about 267 gigawatts of energy from coal by 2030. By 2019, 203 gigawatts of energy was anyways being produced by coal, meaning that it can be assumed that from here onwards till 2030, any increase in our energy will have to be compensated and made up through renewable sources only, meaning that the government is saying that from today onwards till 2030, any increase in the energy requirement will not come through coal, it will all come through renewable sources only, which again is not an easy target to achieve. Not just this, the Prime Minister in his announcement was not very clear about whether this 50% electricity from renewable sources means that we will have 50% installed capacity, or whether we would be producing 50% electricity of our total needs, because these two can be very different. Installed capacity can be much higher as compared to the actual electricity produced. In fact, the Central Electricity Authority in its 2020 report itself said that by 2030, about 44.7% of our electricity will be from renewable energy sources. So, the promise made by the Prime Minister is not a major increase as compared to what the Central Electricity Authority had already promised in its report a year back. The author also says that while most of our announcements have been focused on electricity, we have missed out on many important aspects which lead to pollution and emissions in their own way, and they also have to be curtailed. The author says that there is a need to push towards electric vehicles, towards green construction, and towards state of the art recycling of waste goods. Now, there were many states across the country that offered subsidy on electric vehicles in the past few years. However, from this year onwards, specifically, most of those states have taken back those subsidies, meaning that the electric vehicles now cost more as compared to the electric vehicles, which makes it difficult for the consumer to make a switch towards the electric vehicles. Also, in order to spread the use of electric vehicles, the government has to spend much more on infrastructure, specifically the charging infrastructure, making it much more available. And apart from that, the author also says that the government, in its claims at Glasgow, did not take two very important steps. The first, there were over 110 countries that signed a joint declaration saying that they will end the practice of deforestation by 2030. India took no such pledge, so our commitment to end deforestation is still on a slippery slope. That is also something that the government should have considered, considering that India has a large tribal population and a large number of people who are living in forest, who have been fighting for preserving forests for a long time, fighting against the government authorities. Secondly, India also did not become a part of the global methane pledge, under which over 100 nations have pledged to reduce the emissions of potent greenhouse gas methane by 30% by 2030 as compared to the 2020 levels. Interestingly, methane emission is growing at a very fast pace in India, and this has also contributed to the negative impact of climate change. Although India did take the opportunity at Glasgow to launch another international initiative called Infrastructure for Resilient Island States, under which the government wants the other countries in the world to share their technical knowledge and financial resources with the small island nations to help them. However, the reality is, inside India, most of the coastline cities are still far away from receiving any help of its own government. So the government must first look inside, help its own low lying cities, and then start with this initiative. Also, I am sure that you would have read about the five commitments that the Prime Minister made at Glasgow. I wanted to repeat those here so that it is cemented in your minds. The Prime Minister in his speech said that I would like to present on behalf of India five nectar elements, Panch Amrit, and these were the five goals that he gave. First, India will take its non fossil fuel energy capacity to 500 gigawatts by 2030. India will meet 50% of its energy requirement from renewable energy by 2030. India will reduce the total projected carbon emissions by 1 billion tons from now till 2030. By 2030, India will reduce the carbon intensity of its economy by less than 45%. And last, by year 2070, India will achieve the target of net zero. The next article that we have is headlined Undefined Role, and it is based on India's initiative to hold a regional security dialogue, inviting NSAs from Russia, even from China, Pakistan, and Central Asian nations to discuss the ongoing situation in Afghanistan. As expected, the NSAs from Pakistan and China declined India's initiative and did not become a part of this conference. Nonetheless, the conference went on and reached a consensus over Delhi Declaration. Pakistan, on the other hand, has decided to host its own conference over Afghanistan, which would include the NSAs from China and NSA from Russia as well. Now, interestingly, the nations that participated in India's regional security dialogue have treated Taliban very differently from each other. For example, Turkmenistan has sent a ministerial delegation to discuss connectivity with Taliban because it is one of the neighbors of Afghanistan. Uzbekistan, on the other hand, gave complete diplomatic treatment to Taliban's deputy prime minister and discussed trade and transit. Russia and Iran have maintained their embassies and have not decided to close it down like India. Now, in this scenario, it becomes interesting to see how India reacts. When it comes to international issues such as the one in Afghanistan, in the past, India has never played an active role on the ground and tried to intervene in the issue. Rather, India has always adopted the policy of talking from the sidelines, help with some aid if possible, but not really playing an active role on the ground. However, with Afghanistan being in India's neighborhood and having a direct impact on India, it is only advisable for India to play a more active role here, which is why India hosted this particular conference. Now, India itself has also been given mixed signals. India has held talks with Taliban officials twice and also expressed solidarity with the Afghans. But when it comes to helping them on the ground, Indian government has not been very straightforward. For example, despite multiple applications and help for Indian visa, the Indian government did not give any visa to the Afghanistan citizens amidst the Taliban takeover. India has also not made any monetary contribution since the humanitarian crisis began there, and India has not discussed opening up trade and connectivity with Afghanistan since then. Yes, the Indian government has tried to supply food grains, which Pakistan has stalled, but apart from that, there is no major effort that has been made by India till now. And this regional dialogue seems to be a beginning of India trying to play a more active role. Now, why is it that India needs to do this? That is because India, of late, has invested quite a bit of money and soft power in Afghanistan. A few examples include India's agreement to build the 600-kilometer long Bamiyam Herat rail link. In fact, by 2017, India's investment in Afghanistan crossed over $3 billion, making India one of the largest investors in the development of Afghanistan. I'm sure you all would have read about the Salma Dam, also called the Friendship Dam. The new parliament building of Afghanistan also was sponsored by India and was named after our former Prime Minister Atal Bihari Vajpayee. Not just this, India has also led construction and rehabilitation of many schools, expansion of the national television network. We have also set up Women's Vocational Training Center, focusing on nursery plantation, garment making, food processing, etc. India was also behind the construction of Indira Gandhi Institute for Child Health in Kabul, which has faced multiple terror attacks but still remains a preferred choice for the Afghan people to get their children treated there. That is why, to safeguard all these investments and to ensure peace in our own neighborhood, India needs to play a more active role in the Afghanistan situation. The next article talks about the central government's decision to reduce excise duty on petrol and diesel, and then asking the state governments also to do the same. Now, before we go deeper into this particular article, I would like to give a disclaimer. This article is written by the finance minister of Kerala, meaning that it's written by a politician who is in the opposition to the BJP. So this article will not give you government's side of the things. This article is majorly a criticism of the government's ongoing policy on petroleum. So the author says that the government of India cut down on the excise duty of petrol and diesel on the eve of Deepavali, saying that it is a gift to the farmers for their contribution in ensuring that India's economy goes on strongly even during the lockdown crisis. Since then, the BJP workers in non BJP states have been asking the state governments and protesting, asking them to cut down on the respective taxes within the states. Now, the author says that this is a hypocritical approach from the central government for various reasons. First, till November 2021 beginning, the additional cess on petrol was 31 rupees per litre and 33 rupees per litre on diesel. Now, here there is an interesting detail that you need to understand. The additional cess is not a part of divisible pool of taxes, meaning that the money that the government earns from taxes is divided between the center government and the state governments on the basis of recommendations given by the Finance Commission. However, any additional cess that is put by the center government goes directly into the kitty of the center government only, and the state governments don't get any part of that. And the central government has interestingly put on taxes on petrol and diesel in such a way that the basic tax is very low, which is divided between center and the states, and the additional cess and the additional surcharge are so high, which are actually inflating the prices of fuel artificially. Let us take an example. The author tells you that in 2020-21, the central government collected 3.72 lakh crore in the form of revenue from petrol products. Out of this 3.72 lakh crore, only about 18,000 crore rupees were collected as excise duty. Only 18,000 crore rupees as excise duty means only 18,000 crore rupees will be divided between center and the states as per the recommendation of the Finance Commission. The remaining amount, that is over 3.5 lakh crore rupees, will not be divided between the center and the states and will go directly to the central government. Out of this 18,000 crore rupees also, the Finance Commission, as you know, recommended that 41% of the money should go to states. So out of this 18,000 crore, only 41% of this money will be divided amongst all the states. The remaining chunk that makes up over 95% of revenue from petroleum will not be shared with the states. It will go in the kitty of the center government. Now, this is not illegal because the constitution allows the center government to impose cess and surcharge to whatever limit that they want. But the author says that this is against the spirit of federalism, and this is just increasing the tax burden on the states, not allowing the states to work properly. The author says that the center has not given an explanation about where exactly is this additional money being spent during a pandemic. Now, this is where I would like to slightly disagree. Because this article is written by an opposition member, the government side, as I said in the beginning, has not been mentioned. So, we will discuss a bit about where the additional money is going. Before that, the author also talks about something called RNR, that is revenue neutral rate. Now, before the implementation of the GST, on an average, the goods in India were taxed at 16%. That is the average tax rate. The author says that before the GST was implemented, the government of India made a promise to the states that we will ensure that you don't lose your revenue. That means if before the implementation of GST, if Kerala government, for example, was earning 1 lakh crore revenue, the government said we will try and ensure that after GST also you earn 1 lakh crore or even more, but not less than this. But this has not happened. Right now, the average rate of taxes under the GST is 11.3%. Although this means that things should have become cheaper, but that is not the case. Everything has become costlier, but the taxes on those things have become lower, meaning that the government is not getting enough taxes, but people are still paying more, meaning that the companies have hiked the prices of essential commodities in between. The author says that on an average, the central government is collecting 1 lakh crore of GST a month, which comes down to 12 lakh crore in a year. Since that GST is made up of center GST and the state GST, about 6 lakh crore should go to the states, which is lower than the pre GST level. As per the author, the Kerala government has lost a revenue of about 14,500 crore since the implementation of the GST because the government has not taken the essential steps. The solution, however, is not to increase the tax on GST but to see where exactly is the additional money going. Why is it that a reduction in the taxes is not reaching the people, and in between it is the corporates and the companies which are hiking the prices? In the end, the author also takes a dig on the government with respect to its policies on the corporates. The author says that huge amounts of corporate loans are being waived off. That is, about 8.75 lakh crore worth corporate loans have been waived off by the central government. Not just this, about 1 lakh crore rupees worth of corporate taxes were also foregone in the last financial year, which is leading to crony capitalism in the country and only helping a few corporate entities when the country entirely should be looked after by the government. Now, before jumping on to the next article, as I said, I would also like to give you the government's view so that you have a balanced argument here. When the author says the government has not given any clarification over where they are spending all the extra money that they are getting, the government side of the argument is this. Number one, they are spending it on the oil bonds. That is, previous government had issued oil bonds to the oil companies, and those oil bonds now have to be encashed, and the government has to pay cash money to the oil companies to buy back these bonds. However, the amount of money involved in these bonds is comparatively much lower as compared to the government's earning, so this is not a 100% valid argument. Secondly, during the COVID-19 pandemic, the government's spending has increased drastically on testing. As you would know, most of the tests in the government laboratories are conducted free of cost. Crores of people have gotten tested, so that has put a burden on the government expenditure. Vaccines, most of India is getting free vaccines, both the doses. That does not mean that the government is getting it for free. The government has to give money to the vaccine companies. So that also means that the government is spending more money as compared to earlier. A small chunk has also gone into ensuring quarantine facilities. As you know, in the beginning, in the first wave specifically, the government had to set up a lot of quarantine facilities for people who were testing positive for the virus. The government has also announced various financial packages for the poor people, for the laborers, for the farmers. So this is the government side of the argument about where are they spending the additional money that they are getting from petrol and other revenue sources. The next article that we have is on the unfortunate flooding that is happening in Tamil Nadu, specifically focusing on Chennai. Now, Chennai and floods, unfortunately, is not a new combination. The city saw very bad floods in the year 2015, and everyone thought that the city would learn a lesson from that particular disaster. However, that has not happened. The state of Tamil Nadu is still facing continuous heavy showers from the northeast monsoon, and heavy rains in Chennai and in other parts of the state have led to loss of multiple lives. Now, this article in the Hindu newspaper says that the entire problem of flooding eventually comes down to the issue of drainage. If there are proper drainage facilities, the water stagnation will be minimal, and we would not have a situation where people are losing their lives in such large numbers. Although the article does not give you a lot of information apart from saying that Chennai is blessed with some rivers that could have been utilized much better to control this problem. Apart from this article, I would like to tell you a few reasons why Chennai is facing this problem on such a frequent basis, and why the other cities also in India are prone to such an issue. Just like other cities in India, Chennai has expanded considerably in the past 3 decades. It has been at the center of IT revolution since the 1990s, meaning that a lot of new people have come into the city, a lot of new residential places have to be built. Like other major cities, Chennai has also expanded. Most of expansion of Chennai, that is a part of South Chennai, has been into low-lying areas. Low-lying areas means areas where there is a much higher chance of water stagnating. If you just go on a road, and you can see this in your own city, you can go on main roads, you will see on either side of the road there would not be any small drainage, meaning that when the water falls down, there is no place for the water to go. Most of the area, the new area that we have built, is cemented, so the water cannot even seep into the ground. After the 2015 floods, the Chennai Corporation, in its 2016-17 budget, allocated about 415 crore rupees for the drainage system. However, that has not been utilized judiciously till now. As I said, the built up area in Chennai has increased drastically. In 1980, it was 47 square kilometer, and it has reached over 400 square kilometer in the year 2012, and has increased even further in the past decade. On the other hand, the area under the wetlands has declined during the same period, because more and more area is now being utilized for construction of real estate, for offices, for houses. We have a situation in which we have not left enough space for the water to go. And although cleaning of drainage before the monsoon hits is a good practice, but that is not enough when the rain falls in such a large quantity. Yes, we can attribute it to climate change, but through our own efforts, we have not helped in tackling this situation any better. Now, this is an interesting comparison if you can see from 2007 to 2020. If you can see, this is the Adyar River that flows inside Chennai. And just look at the flood banks of the Adyar River. Empty flood banks, nothing much built here, nothing much built on this side. And now jump to 2020, the same Adyar River, and just see how the flood banks have been constructed. All this construction that has gone on means a lot of land has been cemented, a lot of population has come in, and if you see, this is the area which has faced a lot of damage in the ongoing floods right now. When you have people living everywhere in areas which are very close to the river, this is a problem that comes when we don't have long term planning, which is sadly a case with most Indian cities right now. The next article again is focused on Tamil Nadu and talks about the ongoing debate over the new education initiative in the state. Now, apologies for cutting down the map of Tamil Nadu. I had to snip from the newspaper, so the article was in just two columns. I had to snip it and make it four columns. So, let me tell you what the issue is. The Tamil Nadu government recently introduced a new policy called Ilam Thedi Kalvi, that is ITK. Under this scheme, the government is asking volunteers from the age of 18 to 60 who, in their free time in the evening, that is from 5 p.m. to 7 p.m., would go to the neighborhoods and take classes of children for about 60 to 90 minutes. The aim is very simple. That is, during the pandemic, a lot of children could not go to the schools, and those children have lost out on a lot of precious education. So, the government is seeking volunteers who could go to the neighborhoods without the children having to go somewhere and teach those children. It seems like a good policy. It has a budget of 200 crore and is focused on children from classes 1st till 8th. However, the opposition and even the partners of the ruling DMK party are opposed to this idea. Now, why exactly are they opposed to this idea? This is what we will be discussing in this article. Ever since the formation of the Kothari Commission in 1968, the central government has been following a three language formula. Three language formula simply means that in the schools, the children should be taught three languages, that is, English, Hindi, and a regional language. Now, Tamil Nadu politics, irrespective of whichever party is in power, has always opposed this idea. And since 1968, Tamil Nadu has followed their own two language formula, with children being taught their own Tamil language, English, and not Hindi. Now, the opposition members and even the partners of DMK feel that through this particular scheme, volunteers who are enrolling to teach children would force upon the children the language Hindi, and it would go against the long standing two language formula of Tamil Nadu. The other parties say that the workers of BJP, the workers of RSS, who have always been seeking an opportunity to spread the use of Hindi in Tamil Nadu, would use this opportunity, would enroll as volunteers, and would ask the children to learn Hindi, which would go against the long standing anti Hindi agitation in the state of Tamil Nadu. Also, the new education policy recently released by the central government talked about the usage of volunteers for a similar aim. That is, the new education policy also says that the government should enroll volunteers who will take on one teaching in their neighborhood and will teach children various skills that they have. Interestingly, when the new education policy came out, the DMK, the party that is ruling Tamil Nadu, and other parties in Tamil Nadu also rejected this policy specifically on the three language formula and some other points. The opposition parties are now saying that DMK has changed its stand. It has introduced the same volunteer based idea in Tamil Nadu also. So now they are siding with the BJP. Now, for us, it is not really relevant to go into party based politics. So we will not be discussing about how DMK and BJP are. We will rather focus on this debate of language and its use in education. As I said, since 1968, the government has officially kept its policy of three language formula in the education field. The Constitution of India also under Article 351 makes it a duty of the center government to promote the usage of Hindi throughout the country. So the three language formula is in line with Article 351 as well. The state government so far has not decided to roll back the policy and has maintained the fact that while in the new education policy, the volunteers would have a say in the schools as well and how the schools are running and how the schools are educating children. While in Tamil Nadu, these volunteers are only given the opportunity to teach children in the evening time from 1 to 1.5 hours and would have no say in the running of the school and anything else in the field of education. Also, it is a good time to review the important recommendations of the new education policy 2020, which I am sure you have read multiple times earlier as well. It talks about universalizing early childhood care education, focusing on foundational literacy and numeracy, changing the pedagogical structure in the country, not forcing the children to choose between science stream or art stream and allow the children to have various combinations rather than just choosing PCM or PCB or commerce. It also talks about having a separate curriculum for some gifted children, focusing on core concepts, and also integrating vocational education from as early as class 6. These are the articles that we wanted to discuss with you today from the Hindu newspaper. Now, a couple of practice questions. Number one, is it time for India to leave its sideline position and actively participate in resolving the issues in Afghanistan? Substantiate your answer. Second, there is still a gulf between India's climate change commitments and their realization. Suggest measures to fill in this gap. Both these questions have to be answered in 250 words each and are worth 15 marks each. Thank you so much for watching the video.